Welcome to the GHG Sat live stream ahead of a very special event, the launch of IRIS, their new state-of-the-art emissions hunting satellite. I'm Alexander Milas, host of the GHG cast, and as we learned earlier today, the launch has been delayed due to high winds, but we still intend to show it live here on the GHG Sat site when the new time is confirmed, and it's still been a hugely eventful day today, nonetheless. This morning at a press conference, Pierre Fitzgibbon, Minister of Economic Development, Innovation and Export Trade for Quebec, announced the province is investing 14 million Canadian dollars through Invest Quebec to help develop GHG Sat. Now, and for the next 45 minutes, we will be talking about climate change, space, and business. We'll find out how an intrepid startup from Canada became a pioneer in orbit, why methane matters, and how the world is waking up to emissions. Along the way, we'll be joined by distinguished friends from around the world, and they're going to include Eric Laliberté from the Canadian Space Agency, Dr. Alice Bunn from the UK Space Agency, Astronaut and Colonel Jeremy Hansen from the Canadian Space Agency, and to get things started, a very special guest, one who is having a very busy and prosperous day indeed. He's the founder of GHG Sat, Stephane Germain. Stephane, how are you doing? And I suppose every rocket launch is exciting, every innovation is thrilling, but for you and the team at GHG Sat, this one is especially special. Now tell us why that is.
Well, we're launching our second satellite, IRIS, after a long delay caused by a launch failure and then by a pandemic, and now by a little bit of weather. But we're really excited. This is a major milestone for us. Our team's been working towards this moment since we launched our first satellite 4 years ago. And when we showed that we could measure greenhouse gas emissions from space in high resolution. That's never been done before, and nobody's ever done it since.
You know, it's clear that you and GHG Sat have been on quite the journey, but every story has a beginning. So walk us back to the very first chapter. How did we get here to where we are today?
Well, I personally had always had a passion for space and for bringing space down to Earth. And along the way, through my university days and shortly after, I also developed a passion for the environment. And as technology miniaturized through the 2000s in particular, it became possible to bring space and environment together into a single opportunity, which became GHGSat. But the real light bulb came from when there was an announcement by the government of Quebec with the government of California for a cap and trade scheme. It's a way of putting a price on emissions of carbon. And that then led me to realize what thousands of people before me had realized, which is when you put a price on a ton of carbon, that as an emitter, you'll be motivated to better understand, control, and reduce your emissions. And so that business opportunity combined with the miniaturization of technology and the opportunity to bring the environment and space together was the genesis of GHGSat.
So tell us a little bit about methane. Why does it matter so much?
Well, methane matters because it has 86 times the global warming potential of carbon dioxide over 20 years. It accounts for about 25% of all man-made global warming since the Industrial Revolution. But methane is hard to avoid. So first, and it's important to note this, methane is produced naturally. There's lots of natural sources of methane, including peat bogs and wetlands and so on. However, it is also an inevitable byproduct of industrial activity, whether that's landfills, coal mining, agriculture, or oil and gas. So that's the opportunity we saw. Operators in these sectors want to better understand their emissions so that they can control and reduce them. And we're all increasingly aware of our responsibilities to the environment and to society. Shareholders, investors, and regulators are also very aware of this. And together, there's a desire and a push towards getting to that better understanding, that transparency in global methane emissions.
So what were the challenges that led GHGSat to space?
Well, there's a lot of challenges and a lot of opportunity in space. So first of all, space is a very difficult environment. It's an environment where there's radiation, where there's a vacuum, where there's extremes in temperatures. But space also gives us a unique vantage point from which to offer a service like the one we do. So space allows you to see the whole world, allows you to measure emissions actually with higher accuracy than many existing methods, and allows you to make those measurements at a lower cost than many competing methods. There are over 1 million active wells in North America alone, oil and gas wells in North America alone, and they collectively leak enough methane to heat up about 10 million homes. So to tackle that problem, you have to be able to survey a really large area, do it often, regularly, and you have to be able to trust your measurements. So the way it's done today is, for these wells in particular, is that there are teams that are sent out in trucks with handheld cameras, and they drive around from site to site, taking measurements of valves, of pumps, and they look for leaks. And as you might imagine, that's a significantly labor-intensive, time-intensive type of measurement in an environment which is really variable. You can get different winds, you can get different barometric pressures, which leads to a lot of inaccuracies or variations in the quality of the measurements. So putting it all together, we think using a satellite, we offer a much better solution. It's the right technology being brought to bear at the right time.
Well, it's a fascinating backstory. So I guess it really begs the question, wasn't this already being done?
Sure, national space agencies have been using satellites to measure greenhouse gases in the atmosphere for years, but they're designed to see the whole world every day to inform climate change models. Our measurements are very different. We measure emissions from individual facilities, and we're the only satellite system in the world today that's specifically designed to do this. So, for example, we work with the European Space Agency, who we're very proud to partner with. And we collaborate with the science team and an instrument called TRPOMI on a satellite called Sentinel-5P. And this instrument provides a fantastic view of emissions over a wide area. We've seen this imagery earlier this year showing emissions of falling emissions, showing examples of falling emissions over China as a result of the pandemic. But what this kind of satellite can't do is tell us precisely where emissions are coming from. This type of satellite sees an area, well, this particular satellite sees an area that's about 7 kilometers by 7 kilometers on the ground. And that's too big to pinpoint a source that could be as small as a single vent in an oil well. So for that, you need a satellite that's able to see with a far higher resolution. So our customers need measurements of their facilities. And that's what we designed our system to do from the start, to measure facility level emissions. And we had to invent a whole new instrument to do it. It took about 4 years, but we eventually had our first spacecraft. We christened that spacecraft Claire, and we launched her into orbit at about 500 kilometers altitude. And that was 4 years ago.
So tell us about Claire then. What's she like?
Well, Claire is amazing. She's helped us prove that we can do what we say we can do. And there was honestly quite a bit of skepticism about that at the beginning. Not everybody really believed that you could measure emissions at a facility level from individual oil wells, for example. Claire is about the size of a microwave oven and weighs just 15 kilograms, but Claire has 100 times the resolution of any other emissions detection satellite. Even today, there's nothing flying that can match her capability. She is our demonstrator. So her job initially was to prove that we can do these ambitious things, that we can actually see individual facilities. And we're very proud that over the last 4 years, we've been able to demonstrate that, to prove that it is capable, it is possible to measure emissions from individual facilities. Not only did she prove the concept, but she started producing results of high enough quality that we could share those results with the science community and publish papers. We just published one of our first ones in November of 2019. And at the same time, generate results that are good enough that we could generate revenue with customers. So we've gone from strength to strength ever since.
Yeah, but I gotta pause you there for a second because, when I hear about missions to space, they're usually laden with acronyms and all kinds of designations that, are a little hard to remember. So tell us about how Claire got her name.
We named our satellites after the children of our team, and that's to remind ourselves that we have a common purpose in making the world a better place for the next generation and for our kids. So Claire is the name of the daughter of our lead scientist at GHGSat. The satellite we're about to launch on Saturday night now is called Iris. And later in the year, we're going to put up a satellite called Hugo. And Iris and Hugo are also names of children of our team members. So we aim to have 10 satellites in orbit by the end of 2022. We're going to need plenty of names, but the good news is we've recently had a bit of a baby boom and we have lots to go around.
It's very good news, and obviously congratulations to all. But I guess, it also signifies something deeper. I mean, beyond a sweet story, I think it talks about the responsibility and also the investment in the future that emissions monitoring can really represent, because it really is about the impact, not just today, but in future generations as well. So tell us a little bit about Claire. She's 4 years old. How's she be doing out there in space?
Claire's doing great. So she's traveled something like 850 million kilometers now. It's a pretty big number. And taken about 60,000 measurements of facilities. And she's still going strong. And that's a testament to the skill and devotion of the team here at GHGSat and of our partners who helped design and build Claire and keep her flying. And there's some pretty amazing stories about how we've overcome adversity in the difficult environment of space to keep Claire operating and delivering excellent results even over 4 years and counting. So we have an incredible team who I look forward to joining for a socially distanced online celebration when we launch Iris this weekend.
And a deserved celebration it's going to be, and no question that a tremendous team is behind this incredibly innovative development. So I want to find a little bit more about methane, but first, tell us a bit more about Iris. What makes her different from Claire?
Well, Claire is a great satellite, but we learned an awful lot over the last 4 years, and we embedded all of that in Iris. And that fundamentally is the difference between the two, is we've implemented significant technical improvements. And the headline for that is that we've increased performance by a factor of 10. And that means we can detect emissions that are about 10 times smaller. So emissions rates that are about 10 times smaller than what we can measure with CLAIR using IRIS. And while still keeping the same 25-meter resolution on the ground as we have with CLAIR. So every satellite we build, we want to tweak and improve. Hugo will be a little better again than Iris. And that way we're always flying the best technology we possibly can.
You know, it's hugely fascinating stuff, and it's clear that with every new launch, there is also incredible new innovation, because there's so much to learn from, you know, preceding ones. You know, so it's inspiring stuff, and it has sparked something truly wonderful as well. Now, earlier today, before we learned of the launch delay, we spoke with a very close friend of GHGSat to get his take on the story, and I asked him to tell us a little bit more about his involvement with GHGSat, about monitoring greenhouse gases from space, and how GHGSat fits with national space missions, not just from Canada, but from Europe, US, and even from Japan. And just joining us on the program is Eric Laliberté from the Canadian Space Agency. He is the Director General of Space Utilization. Eric, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very good, thank you.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure to have you aboard, and it is such an important day for so many reasons. And I guess just from the outset, what we should really think about is what does the Canadian Space Agency do these days in terms of one of the most important areas of innovation these days, Earth observation?
Oh, we've been, the Canadian Space Agency has been involved in Earth observation for many, many years. And currently we do have active missions, and we're also looking at the future missions and the future needs for observation. To name a few, we have a Canadian satellite, GHGSat, that was famous to look at ozone and other gases. It's a satellite that's in its 17th year of operation. But we also team up with international partners. We have an instrument called MOPIT on the Terra mission for NASA. We do have an OSIRIS instrument on a satellite called Odin. And we also have the whole family of RadarSat satellites across the years that have looked at the environment and basically have looked at the changes that occur in the environment, having a global view of many areas of interest. Basically, the environment and all the observations tie into maritime safety, looking at the changes in the poles, ice melting, either agriculture, forestry, fisheries. Pretty much Earth observation is connected to all the human economic activities, basically. So Canadian Space Agency is doing a lot. It's one of its focus on Earth observation and making sure that this data is available for Canadians and humanity.
Well, I guess that's one of the ironies, is that you know, people perhaps without even realizing are using the benefits of these areas of research every single day, you know, and it's invisible from everyday life, but it seems to be such an area of innovation and growth and progress and so on. So what's next from the Canadian Space Agency's perspective? I mean, what do you have coming up? Because I've read about Fireside, for instance, which seems a stunning piece of kit.
Yes, you're mentioning Fireside. It's one of the interests. Of course, it's not just in Canada that there's a concern about wildfires and their impact on the environment, on the air quality. So we did start work on a potential mission that would look at wildfires, fill in a gap of observation. That is to make us, you know, to enable better understanding of how they progress, what are their impacts on the environment, but also on the resources that we need to manage. When you say, when we're looking at what we do in the future, we're constantly looking for opportunities, working with partners looking at what are the next needs in terms of observation. And we do team up with international partners, with commercial partners now, and looking at what are the next interest in terms of observation. So greenhouse gas, for example, are really a big interest in terms of how they affect the climate and the quality, basically the quality of our life and healthy Canadians all across the country. So we are looking at the different technologies, always on the lookout to see how different measurements can be taken, can be made. And I think the key for space and in the environment as a whole is that we look at complementarity. So looking at how we can benefit from each other and from the strength of each sector, whether it be the research in academia, the innovation in industry, or the applications for government services.
Well, you know, it's such a fascinating area of development, certainly. I mean, so how do companies like GHG Sat fit into the picture? You know, because you've mentioned a few things like cooperation, partnerships. It sounds like there's a lot of teamwork involved in really kind of painting an accurate picture of what's going on.
Yeah, teamwork is the key. Like I said, space and environment, nobody can do it alone. We have to look at the strength of every sector, every partner, and where we can, we basically have a more of a team, or I would say a coordinated approach in a way. So companies like GHGSat offer a nice opportunity in terms of there's a commercial service that they can offer. So measurements that GHGSat is doing complements other missions, other satellites that are looking at the same topic of greenhouse gas, but in a different way, in a different angle. And what they have the potential to serve commercial client, which the government can be a client as well, and complement what we see as other measurements that are required in order to achieve the objectives. So it's really about teamwork and making sure that we share in our I would say business plans and looking our look forward so that we can count on each other in order to have the maximum coverage of the data that we need to collect.
Well, a kind of coverage that we're hoping is going to be hugely bolstered with the launch of IRIS later on today. Eric, I gotta say, on behalf of everyone at GHGSat, thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you later.
It's a pleasure, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A fascinating discussion indeed, and I think it's worth pointing out some repeated themes as well, not just technology, but also cooperation, teamwork, which I guess kind of brings some focus onto the human factor as well. So Stephane, Eric talked about the data that you share with the Canadian Space Agency and others around the world. Now, I know you work with ESA, the European Space Agency, for example, as well. Now, for a growing business, can that be a potential distraction for you?
Well, we're a business first, and that means that we have to sell our data to customers in order to generate revenue. And revenue then in turn allows us to reinvest in the business and provide greater capability to better serve our customers. So it's very important that we keep a focus on that. However, we also have a responsibility to share data and do that with scientists, with other agencies, and collaborate very much in the way that Eric described in the segment we just heard. And so, we have to keep in mind that emissions are a global issue. We benefit from the expertise of colleagues around the world, and we want to help with that research effort by providing data to them and also benefiting from the data that they get from their systems and their satellites in improving the products we offer to our own customers. Accuracy is also key to what we do, and sharing information with peers and experts means subjecting our work to ongoing, independent scrutiny. And that's demanding, and yeah, that does take a lot of effort, but it's essential. And if we want to be credible with our customers, if we want to be credible with the global community, it's important that people have the ability to really objectively look at our data and give our honest and rigorous assessment of that data. So we are careful not to overclaim or exaggerate. If anything, we try to stay relatively cautious with regards to our data and the analysis of our data, because that trust as we build it is vital. So we're certainly grateful to the collaborations we do have with the Canadian Space Agency, with the European Space Agency, with scientists at Harvard, for example, at Astronaut in the Netherlands, and other leading institutions around the world. And we're proud that these partners take our data and that we can use their data in return as well. It's a real vote of confidence in the collaboration that is required in atmospheric science like this to really advance the state of the art and ultimately to tackle climate change.
And I think it might be worth to pause there and actually talk about how the data is acquired. I mean, because how exactly do you detect greenhouse gases when you're 500 kilometers above the ground?
Yeah, it's a bit of a challenge. The basic idea is called absorption spectroscopy. So what's going on is imagine every gas in the atmosphere absorbs light at specific wavelengths. And that's like a spectral fingerprint. It's like every gas has its own unique fingerprint where it absorbs light at specific wavelengths. Our instrument is a spectrometer, and that spectrometer is designed to look for that absorption of light at those very specific wavelengths. And when we get the combination of wavelengths and absorptions of each of those, we can build up a picture of how much carbon dioxide and how much methane is present in every one of the pixels that we're measuring in the field of view of our satellite. So, it's quite a challenge, but it's been done by others before us, and obviously by us now, with our own special twist. So, fun fact, our instrument was inspired by the Fabry-Perot interferometer. And that was invented, if you can believe this, over 100 years ago in 1899. So what we've done is obviously done something new with this, and we've made some important changes. We patented those changes, and that's now at the heart of the system which allows GHGSat to offer a unique service in the world. And it is kind of fun to think that the most advanced emission satellites flying today have a direct link to that kind of past. Science truly is a continuum.
That's an amazing bit of history there, and there's a salient point to be made about that continuity in terms of what GHGSat does, because it is continuing that. And I love that quote about, if I've been able to see them further, it's because I stand on the shoulder of giants. And GHGSat is truly helping us to see a lot further and deeper indeed. And now we're going to talk to someone who's got enormous experience of observing the Earth from space and also knows the value of international collaboration as well. Now, Dr. Alice Bunn is the International Director at the UK Space Agency, and this is what she had to say. Alice, welcome to the program. Thank you so much for taking the time out to join us.
Thank you.
Well, you've done quite a lot in your career, but currently you are spending your time as the International Director for the UK Space Agency, which tells me, and I got to surmise here, that you've seen a few launches here and there.
Well, I have. Gosh, not as many as I'd like to. In fact, one. Can you believe that? International Director, I've only seen one launch, but it was spectacular. And the reason I've only seen one is because, everyone working in the space industry should get to see a launch, because it is a very, very defining moment. There's nothing as symbolic, really, for all that work and all that technical expertise and all that effort, seeing that actual launch go up. Completely amazing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess this is a thing, right? Because beyond the science, the data, the engineering marvel of it all, at a visceral level, just at a human level, I mean, it's got to be quite astonishing to see that take place. I mean, describe your experience.
Yeah, totally. And I should add, of course, I've seen lots and lots of launches. Watching online, I remember one. Gosh, it was years ago now, like nearly 20 years ago. and sat watching MVSat being launched, and sat next to a dear, dear colleague who just said, you know, this is all I've been doing for 16 years. I've been working on this project for 16 years. Everything is on top of a big fire at the moment, right? This is really, really make or break. Happily, it was a very successful launch, and you know, all was well. But it's such a defining moment.
Oh, it's absolutely got to be. But I suppose that's the thing, you know. It is an investment of time, of hope, you know, of you know, so many aspirations and so on. So there's a lot more going on than just, well, we hope for a successful orbital insertion. Everyone wants to see it go up safely. Everyone wants to see their dreams realized. Yeah,
exactly. And no one is breathing for the longest time. No one is breathing, you know, just the anticipation and the waiting, just to be, you know, the relief as well, right? There's a big, big, big relief about seeing the launch go up successfully.
Oh, well, there absolutely must be. But I suppose, you know, there's more than, you know, just the launch. It's also what things like this represent as well. And GHGSat's launch of IRIS represents a very unique collaboration with international space agencies, the European Space Agency. Ariane, do you see cooperation between the private and public sector as perhaps the future of exploration and Earth observation?
Yeah, absolutely, without a doubt. In fact, I'd like to think that we've taken that approach in the UK for a long while now. We're really proud that we've got a reputation of being, you know, one of the most commercially facing space agencies, countries, as regards to space, because we do firmly believe that this is the future, right? This is the way it goes, with government taking a role, you know, in terms of risk reduction, working with industry to enable some of these really, really exciting innovations to launch, take off. So I think it is absolutely the future. And, you know, there's lots of, everyone's got their part to play, right? The government typically funds, yes, we fund sometimes, you know, some of the early R&D to help with that risk reduction. We also have a responsibility around regulation. I mean, there's so much exciting innovation going on in the sector at the moment. You know, it's our job to make sure that we manage that responsibly, but also enabling some of these really, really exciting commercial innovations to really take off.
Well, I suppose you're in a very unique position, because it's not just what you do at the UK Space Agency, but you're also the co-chair of the World Economic Forum, the Global Council on Space Technology, which is a big way of saying that you seem to have the long view on what's coming up. And so is what's happening with the GHGSat launch, do you think, representative of a wider trend?
Yeah, absolutely do, actually. So the World Economic Forum stuff is a really good example. There we're seeing industry taking initiative. So one of the things that we're working on at the moment is the idea that industry can be on the front foot in dealing with our challenge of space operations, particularly in the low Earth orbit environment. So whilst traditionally that's been the domain of governments, and you know, we all look to UN frameworks as the kind of guiding legal cornerstone for all this activity, actually we're seeing initiatives from industry saying, well, you know, hang on, we've got a stake here too, right? There's, you know, hundreds and thousands of different space companies now operating in that environment. So they're taking the initiative to really set best practice and really kind of lead the way in responsible space operations. So yeah, you see it from lots of different lenses.
I mean, it feels like a really exciting time. It might not always make the headlines, but every time you actually pay attention, it just seems like there is always something really interesting going on. Does it feel almost like we're at the dawn of a new chapter?
Yeah, I think so. And a lot of it has been precipitated by this change in relationship, I think, between government and industry. You know, it really feels like the shackles are off at the moment. You know, it really feels like there is a new way of working, which is bringing about these incredible new missions in space. So yeah, it's a really exciting time.
Well, you know, of course, it's not just about these partnerships, you know, but also what the specific technologies, you know, can do, and you know, what IRIS is going to do, and what GHGSat are doing in terms of monitoring emissions, you know, to help with emissions reduction and so on, is really innovative. What role do you think space agencies can play in ensuring that more of this technology can get out there to help companies like GHGSat, you know, deliver on that promise?
Yeah, well, so we have to be the facilitators here, right? We have to be the enabling agencies to make sure that we're not standing in the way of industry, where industry can seize these opportunities. So sometimes that will mean funding in the kind of early R&D stages. Often it will mean making sure that we're leaning forwards in our regulatory approaches, making sure that we're recognising the innovation coming down the track, and not holding back industry, because I think. What's really interesting, and what's certainly true of GHG Sat, is the speed at which the industry is moving now. And I think, whereas traditionally you had governments either acting individually or often in big multilaterals, there's a strength to that too, but that tends to be a slower project. It's just the nature of that. The decision making is slower. Contrast that with, companies like GHG Sat, and they're just really, pulling things out of the bag at a pace that is really, really impressive, and a pace that you can do, I think, when you're, a private sector operator. So I think, governments need to wake up to that, and they need to be ready to that, and we need to make sure that we've got all those kind of frameworks enabling them to flourish and keep that pace.
Of course, and it's not just any technology. It's technology specifically designed, to inform us, about emissions, to perhaps help us, better protect and monitor, the impact that we are having, and so on. Which I guess to many people is a surprise, because when people think about space technology, they're not always thinking about Earth observation. They're thinking about telecommunications. They're thinking about space exploration. But Earth observation is such a crucial form of what we're doing up there.
I know, right? You've totally got me on my soapbox. I could not agree more. I'm absolutely passionate about this. Sure, people think of space and people think about, rockets and astronauts, but actually space is just fundamentally woven into everyday life in a way that most people don't appreciate at all. I very often say, if I'm giving a talk to the general public, you use space 6 or 7 times before you even got to work this morning, and people are surprised. And then you say, okay, did you see a weather forecast? Right. So 99% of that data that goes into the weather forecast comes from space. Did you travel on the train? Did you use the navigation, feature in your car? It's just everywhere, right? Space technology is everywhere, but that is so true for Earth observation. I mean, I think, it's fascinating at the moment as we are sitting trying to understand what's happening with climate change. Over 50% of the essential climate variables that we need to even understand what is going on with our climate can only be measured from space. I mean, space is such a powerful tool, that powerful vantage point to enable us to understand what's going on our own planet. Yeah, I warned you. You've got me on my soapbox.
We like soapboxes. I suppose this is the exciting thing. Iris is going to give us a whole new perspective on what is happening, and we're all going to sit back and, I suppose, cross our fingers in the meantime. Alice, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on, and thank you so much for spending the time with us.
Thank you.
Some incredibly stimulating and important thoughts from Dr. Alice Bunn just then. Now, Stephane, to give us some context, you're looking to develop your relationship with the UK. Tell us a little bit about where GHGSat's going.
Well, after listening to Alice, now you know why we want to move to the UK, or open an office, sorry, not move. So what we plan to do is open a global analytics center in the UK later this year. We're doing that because the UK has a world-class capability in handling and processing space data, and we want to tap into that. We'll use the UK as a base for investigating emissions around the world outside of North America, and we'll continue to do the good work we do for North America from our offices in Canada and in the US. IRIS will feed that data from from Iris and from Claire and from Hugo towards the end of the year into the new UK Centre, and we'll use that to help countries meet their climate and development goals. We'll also work with the UK and EU financial and insurance sectors in helping them and businesses they work with to better understand their emissions.
Well, hugely important and exciting developments, not just happening in orbit, but also down here on Earth as well. Now, if you just joined us, you're watching a webcast from GHGSat ahead of their launch of their new thrilling emissions hunting satellite, a satellite called IRIS. Now, Stephane, we've heard that GHGSat is a global science community working to combat climate change. It's also helping some of the world's biggest industries cut their emissions as well. But what I'm interested to know is what it's been like for your business at the start, because what strikes me is you didn't just start a company, you kicked off a whole new sector. Now, what's that experience been like for you?
Well, it's been a very humbling experience. We started, and this is just good business practice in general, we started by talking to customers and making sure that we understood their need so that we could design our system to answer that need. And that meant talking to hundreds of people and literally making calls for months and months and months at the very beginning, and still do making lots of calls to customers to understand, is our idea any good? Is there any appetite for it? And fortunately, at the beginning, and obviously still now, but right at the beginning, almost everyone I spoke to loved the idea. And that motivated me to push ahead. So, of course, pioneering new satellite technology is not easy, but we are blessed with amazingly talented people who are motivated by our mission. And Claire is a testament to just how good those people are. And of course, IRIS very shortly will be as well. We've also been blessed to have great support from agencies like Sustainable Development Technology Canada, Emissions Reduction Alberta, the Canadian Space Agency, and from many major customers, particularly in oil and gas, who are really eager to find out better ways to address their emissions. And they all embrace the opportunity to better understand our technology and how it can be used to let them have a better transparent view of their emissions, so ultimately they can reduce them. So a partnership is something of an overused phrase in business, but that's really the way it came together in this case. I also want to highlight that starting a business takes an awful lot of perseverance. IRIS's launch is a good example. As we discussed earlier, it was originally supposed to be launched in August of 2019. Then there was a failure of another launch that affected the timing of that. So we were delayed until March 2020. And then we are delayed, of course, by a pandemic. Now we're being delayed by a little bit of weather. But, in each of these cases, it was absolutely the right thing to do. After years of preparation, investment, building the satellite and all the rest, we work around and we appreciate and live with these unexpected delays. But with all of that, we're very eager to get going. So, with this last little weather delay, we're just about there. But as of this weekend, fingers crossed, we're going to see the launch of our next great satellite, IRIS.
And it is so important never to underestimate, the human factor involved in all of these. That the hopes, the investment of time, as you say, the perseverance that it's taken for GHGSat to go from the beginning to where we are now, which is incredibly exciting. So tell us what it's going to mean to have not one but two satellites in orbit.
Well, quite simply, it means that we can do more and better for our clients. We can explore a wider area. We can revisit hotspots more often. And with IRIS, we can even just, so there's growing demand for what we're doing. And we can't wait to get IRIS up there and show exactly what we can do with this next generation of technology.
Well, speaking of, getting up there, there's the not insignificant factor of the launch itself right now. Unless you've had the privilege of witnessing a rocket launch in person, I think it's really difficult to comprehend just the incredible power of it all and what it really signifies. Now, one person who's got an incredibly special understanding of that and a unique perspective is Canadian astronaut and Colonel Jeremy Hansen. We spoke a little earlier with him, and I asked him, what is IRIS going to be experiencing right now, just ahead of her launch into the great beyond? Well, we're absolutely delighted to welcome Colonel Jeremy Hansen to the show today on an auspicious day, to put things mildly. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Well, it's wonderful to have you here. And I suppose what's unique about today is it is a little robot being launched. Iris is going up into orbit. And I suppose it's the tendency of people to humanize these. And so I wondered, from your perspective, what might be going through Iris's robotic mind right now?
Well, if I were in Iris's shoes right now, I think I'd be kind of in that game day mode. So all the pre-launch jitters that I had the day before are probably now behind me, and I'm focused on the mission ahead. And I know that I'm ready for this. I know that the vehicle is in good shape. I'm in good shape, and I'm excited, and I'm pumped to fly to space.
And it is an extraordinary mission because so much space exploration is frequently focused on what's out there, but not looking back. What's unique about GHGSat's role in telling us more about our homeworld?
Yeah, I think that's really a really important aspect of the whole story of space exploration. You know, you're right. We did kind of start out trying to understand what was out there, even in low Earth orbit, trying to understand, space weather and the ionosphere and things like that. But now we just have a total understanding that the best way to take the heartbeat of the entire planet is from space. You put something in an orbit, the Earth rotates underneath it, and you can see the entire planet. And that is truly what this is all about. I think that's the example that GHGSat is giving us, is that, hey, we can take part of the ownership of the problems that face our planet into our own hands. We can collect real and credible data so that we can make educated decisions. And that's what really comes back to its benefit for humanity on really important subject areas like climate change, something that affects all of us. We're already seeing, rise in global temperatures, and it's real. And we need more data to make educated decisions because there are huge impacts either way. There are economic impacts, but there are certainly impacts to the basic needs of society. Things like water and food. All of this is really, really important that we're understanding the facts.
So much of Iris's mission represents the apex of technology. I mean, just like true innovation and so on. Describe the effort by the teams behind something of this nature. What caliber are the engineers, the scientists, the thinkers, all the people who have made this possible? And I wondered if you might want to say a note to many of the people at GHGSat who might be watching.
Yeah, well, why don't I start out with, I'm immensely proud of GHGSat. I think they're a shining example of a major contribution to the world. The vision to create something sustainable, something that's not just government-based but commercial-based, so that we can have a sustainable program. We can join teams. Obviously, I'm not part of a government program, but the whole idea of government programs is to enable commercial programs to come along and take over niche areas that they're ready to take over. And so GHGSat is leading in this area. I think that's remarkable, and I'm super proud of them. As far as the quality of the people, the way the engineers, the scientists, the whole team, I just think of them as creators. And our world, our society has always faced challenges, and we've always faced challenges. But it's the creators, the people that look at a challenge and say, "Hey, I'm gonna take a bite out of this. I'm gonna take one more step up the mountain." These are the creative and innovative individuals that are leading society. So super proud of you.
Do you think there's something specific to be learned from astronauts' perspective of the Earth? Because so many over the years have commented on the fragility of the Earth's atmosphere, just how small it looks against the backdrop of space. Do you think that there is something almost poetic about the way that so many astronauts have described the Earth?
Yeah, I do. And I feel a little bit disadvantaged to truly answer that question because I haven't seen it with my own eyes yet. But what I have witnessed is my own personal conversations with so many of my colleagues as they come back from space. And it's just clear to me they've had this incredible experience. They went to space knowing, just like you and I, we've seen pictures, we've seen videos. It has definitely conveyed the magnificence of our planet. And like you mentioned, how it is just a rock hurtling through this vast void of space. And somehow we're able to exist here. That's incredible. Our spaceship Earth, as we love to call it. So my colleagues have gone to space with that understanding already, just like you and I have. But yet somehow when they got there, it was different seeing with their own eyes. One of my friends explained it to me. He said, it's just something different about how you as a human float into the cupola. That's the place with the panoramic windows, in the kind of like this image that you see behind me. When you float in there and you go from the macroscopic with your wide field of view eyes, and then you use a camera to zoom in on something, that whole experience is just something completely different. And when they look back at our planet, they realize a few fundamental truths. One, it's the only planet we have the technology to live on right now, and we're all in this together. And it's clear to them what we do in one part of the world affects other parts of the world. And that's why it's really important that we start to work towards a global community that's solving problems together. And that's what I love about space is, in our human spaceflight program, for example, we're setting goals so big that we're bringing people not just from across a country, which we are, but we're bringing people from around the world to take on some of the most incredible tasks that humanity has ever undertaken. And I think that's a great example, on par with the kind of example GHGSat is setting with, creating data, figuring out models. I love the fact that, there's a sharing of data at the highest levels and then a paying model to make this sustainable. I mean, this is genius. It's brilliant. It's really, really important.
You've touched on so many important sentiments in what you just said. One of them, really resonates, I think, with the fact that GHGSat, they name their satellites after their employees, children. What do you think about that as perhaps a reminder of what GHGSat does in perhaps being a sentinel to observe our world and ensure that we can do what we can to protect it for future generations?
Yeah, I think that is just it. It's just a constant reminder. I mean, we all know these things to be fundamentally true. We know we're custodians of this planet and that right now humanity is dependent on it. And now today we understand we're impacting it. And there's still a lot to learn. And so this idea of being responsible for future generations is something we all fundamentally know, but sometimes you just got to say the things we already know. You just got to repeat them. And that's how you create a culture of awareness and a culture of action.
Colonel Hansen, it's been an absolute pleasure to spend this time with you. Thank you so much. Do you have any final words for the team as they await the launch of IRIS?
Just one really important thing, and that is go IRIS.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time, and a genuine pleasure to connect with you as well. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, it's my pleasure.
Go IRIS, indeed. Some truly fascinating insight and eloquence from someone with a unique perspective on what it's reminding us of the big picture. Now, Stephane, once IRIS is in orbit and brought online, what happens then? Because clearly the launch has so much focus right now, but it's what happens after. That's all what it's all about, right?
Well, after IRIS, we're launching HUGO. So HUGO, we're aiming for December 2020. So by the end of 2022, we'll have 10 satellites in orbit. There's also going to be some pretty exciting developments here on the ground. We've talked already about the UK Analytics Center we want to open before the end of the year. We're also working on some interesting projects in the UK, including with the UK's National Physics Laboratory. So we're doing more collaborations and furthering our understanding of emissions with more partners. Again, later this year, we'll be unveiling a global emissions map for methane. And that's going to use the most up-to-date information to give a near real-time view of emissions anywhere in the world. It'll be free, and that's important. It's going to be free to access and continually updated. So that's part of our contribution to providing data to the world. Even though we're a for-profit business, back to an earlier theme, we want to provide some of our data for free to collaborate and to increase collaboration internationally. One of the biggest developments coming up will be in the way that we use their data as well. So we've been pioneering the use of high-resolution satellites to find sources of emissions, and we're going one step further and applying analytics to our data, including predicting where leaks might occur. So all the data we generate from our growing fleet of spacecraft, as well as information from other sources, are fed into proprietary artificial intelligence algorithms. And these are trained on just vast quantities of data to produce the best, most informative predictions that we can, based on patterns that we see that have historically led to emissions, of where we might anticipate emissions to happen in the future. So that's just an example of the kind of analytics that we're bringing to bear now, the kind of insights that we're providing for our customers, and there's many more to come.
Well, it's incredible work, and it does sound like things are about to become very busy indeed for GHGSat. And I got to say, I want to thank you for taking the time out on what I'm sure is just an incredibly busy time for you. If you're just tuning in, please stay with us a little longer because we're now going to be joined by our guests, Eric LaLiberte and Dr. Alice Bunn from the UK Space Agency. We've had some questions submitted to us earlier via social media, but if you have something that you'd like to ask our guests, do let us know and we'll do our very best to get back to you. Now I'm going to hand the microphone over to Stephane, the busiest man in the room, and leave it with you.
Thanks, Alex. I appreciate it. Okay, well, first of all, Alice, Eric, thank you very much for joining us. And, we really appreciate our collaboration with both of your agencies. And it's a pleasure to have you on today with us. Thank you. And so if we go down a list of some of the questions that were submitted, I think maybe the first one that we can dive into, it says, look, what do you see as the role of satellites in monitoring climate change? So Eric, maybe I can start with you. How would you answer that?
Yeah, thank you, Stephane. I think climate change, basically there's two ways to look at it, right? We can take actions to improve the situation, correct the course, mitigate the impacts, or we can take action to adapt to climate change. But all of this requires information. And the information, satellites will play a big part. I think I see the demand just growing in terms of observation, of data, of analytics, as you've mentioned. It's going to be just exploding because we see that the connection to the climate and the climate change that are accelerating is having an impact on everything that we do. Even recently with the pandemic that you mentioned, it caused your second delay. There's a connection to climate change to that. That means research. That means innovation. That means new information that we want to capture. So I see a future that is just going to try to cope with the growing demand, and in order to cope with that, we'll have to look at. I think some of my colleagues mentioned not just the government, but the commercial, as GHGSat has been a leader in. So that's really what I see. In a nutshell, there's going to be an explosion of demand, and how will we collectively meet that demand in order to cope with climate change issues?
Alice, over to you. Oh, I think we may have you on mute, Alice.
Yeah, I think we might be having a bit of a technical there. So I'm going to suggest perhaps we just jump over to Eric while we sort that in the background. Okay.
All right. Well, Eric, maybe we can discuss the second question that came in, and you're going to get a lot of airtime. So,
these are subjects that are interesting, so I can talk for a long time.
All right. Well, thank you. So the second question that came in was about the role of. Oh, hang on. I think Alice is back. Well, I'll ask you the second question, and when Alice is back, we can ask her to jump in as well. So the second question is about orbital debris, and in general, the environment of low Earth orbit. So how do you see the current situation? There's a lot of concern about the volume of orbital debris, and how can we improve that over the next few years?
Yeah, there is a lot of concern. I think it's rightfully so. We take this seriously, like any environment that we've used in the past. Space is one environment that we got to take care of. The Canadian Space Agency works with international partners in order to develop, for example, to develop guidelines. We work with the Interagency Space Debris Coordination Committee, which is a body of experts that are looking at the long-term sustainability of using space, particularly LEO, but also GEO and everything that's around space. The focus is there to try to come up with evidence, analysis that support, guidelines that we can provide commercial countries, everybody that plans to have a use for space and basically either launch, be careful of debris, but also have a sense of continuous use. So therefore, if you launch a constellation, you mentioned by 2022, 10 satellites. Well, you will want to have a plan to replenish, replace, but also retire some of those satellites. So some of the guidelines basically come up with this group, like the 25-year rule that was basically calculated that, after a life of a satellite, you should not leave it there beyond the 25 years. And these guidelines are constantly being discussed, challenged, and looked at. But we share that information so that in your business cases, you can take that into account. We also work with the UN Committee on Peaceful Use of Space, which is looking, actually one of the themes that is being looked at by this committee is the long-term sustainability. So it is a very serious issue, not because we're in danger, but because we want to be proactive and make sure that there is a continuous possibility. Like I said, the growing demand is going to need a growing number of observation system. Well, if we want to be able to observe, we need to be able to take care of that environment.
Right. Alice, I think you're back. Would you want to pitch in on the orbital debris question?
Yeah, I'm back. Hello. Orbital debris. Yeah, I mean, gosh, you really hit on a really, really key issue of our time, I think. And, it's worth reflecting. It's only a couple of decades ago that there weren't actually that many players in space. It was the big governments. The environment was relatively uncongested, but we know that's not true now. We know that environment is getting more congested. So it's really on us to do something about it. I think there's some really interesting parallels with climate change, right? And you talk to these giants of the environmental world, people like David Attenborough, and you can see the horror because they're like, all those things we did 30, 40 years ago, we didn't know that we were wrecking our own climate. Well, we know, right? We know if we don't take action, we're going to wreck that orbital environment. So it's absolutely incumbent on us to do something about it. But I feel really hopeful, actually. So one of the things I'm involved in at the moment is an initiative under the World Economic Forum, so very much an industry-led initiative. And it's really recognizing that in that orbital environment, it's no longer just a handful of big governments. It's tons of us, right? It's nearly 100 countries. It's umpteen commercial players. So I think it's really heartening, actually, that you've got industry taking the initiative and saying, you know what, we've all got a stake in this. We've all got to do something about this. And I feel quite optimistic that we will find the right way of managing the environment, because we do have to do it quickly.
Great, thanks. So I want to go back and touch on and actually there's a question that came in, and I want to go back and touch on the theme that you mentioned in your pre-recorded video with regards to commercial space ventures. So the question is, how can new commercial space ventures work collaboratively with traditional space projects to address climate change? So Alice, why don't you go first on that one?
I love it. I love it. We're always categorizing our programs, aren't we? We're like, we're new, we're old, we're big, we're small, we're high resolution, we're low resolution, we're fast, we're slow, we're long life, we're disposable. And I think what's interesting about that is, in all those different axes, put any of those two together in combination, you're going to have a different application, right? You're going to have a different thing that is targeted to meet a specific customer requirement. So really therein lies the answer. And, if I can stereotype for a moment, traditional normally means institutional, long life, You know, good reliability, but perhaps not exactly pacey in terms of being able to respond quickly to the challenges we see today. I think where the commercial space has a massive advantage, it's in decision making. You know, believe me, I know I sit around many huge governmental multilateral organizations. Our problem isn't money, our problem is taking decisions quickly, right? So the commercial space sector can do that, and they can make sure that they can augment what the, you know, so-called traditional sector has been able to put in place to really get that sweet spot between all the different capabilities that you need to meet, you know, a customer requirement. And when we are still, because we are, right, still constantly understanding climate and understanding the ways in which we can manage climate, that's really a powerful contribution from the commercial sector.
Hey, Eric, do you want to pitch in on that one?
Sure. I really liked what Alice was describing, and it's true. We basically see the future as a collaboration, right? Alice alluded to the strength of the commercial sector and maybe the weakness of the institutional sector, but really I think we have strength in each of these sectors, and when combined, that's where we have the most out of the, you know, the coordination, the interaction between the two. So I completely agree with the fact that I think it's not one augmenting the other. I think it's both of them coming in with a strength and influencing each other. So I think Stephane, we've had the discussion about, you know, the big missions and the smaller mission, quicker missions, and there is basically that's an account, you account for that in your business planning. That's why you went with, you know, this approach. It's doable from a commercial point of view, but it's also addressing some of these, a gap that is not necessarily addressed, or that was not addressed. So you are taking advantage of this ecosystem. I think what we need in order to have a very good connection between the two sectors, and between that and even the research sector that's growing, it's a long-term view that we share as much as we can, realizing that business is business, and therefore there's some things that you don't necessarily need to share, can share, but as much as we can share the long-term view, I think that helps everybody plan better and ensure that we're covering all angles.
Okay, I think we have one more question, and this one.
Stephane, you want to go to another question, or can I turn the table on you?
Oh, well, okay, you can turn the table on me.
No, because we just finished talking about the combination of you know, traditional and commercial, and we also hear that basically data for climate change, like weather, should be free and open. So how do you reconcile this with the commercial, the business aspect?
Okay, well, so for us, it's important to do both. So first and foremost, we're a business, and so we have to provide data for sale. And to be clear, we provide it for sale to anybody. So that's part of transparency. It has to be available for operators, for governments, for NGOs, for scientists, for anybody. But on the other hand, we also need to make enough data available for free that people can get a sense of how useful this data can be. Also, to the accuracy statements I made earlier, have an opportunity to check independently whether they believe the quality of the data that we're producing. And so for that reason, we, with actually the Canadian Space Agency and the European Space Agency, as a three-party, put together a plan to make 5% of IRIS's capacity available for free under an RFP process managed by the Canadian Space Agency and the European Space Agency for academics and scientists to do whatever they want with the data, whether it's to get to know it, whether it's to test the accuracy or validate our data. So that's an example of how we're making some of the data available for free. But I think probably the best example is one that when Alice and I were both at the World Economic Forum earlier this year, we announced that we are going to make our methane data available for free on a global scale at a reduced resolution. And that's the key point. We're going to make our data, which comes in a 25 meter by 25 meter resolution, so really, really high resolutions, and you can see small areas on the surface of the Earth. We're going to aggregate that into, on average, a 2 by 2 kilometer grid and make that available for free. And we wanted to do that in time for COP26, which was scheduled for November 2020. Now that's been delayed, but we're going to hold to our promise to make it available this fall. So that's how we're trying to balance the two. We have to make a profit, we have to generate revenue, but we're also going to make data available for free to get the scientific and academic community interested and give them an opportunity to validate our data, and also make aggregated data available to the general public. So is that a fair answer?
Yes,
Alice,
thanks.
anything I missed in that you would want me to touch on, or do you think I was a fair summary? Okay.
But you know, I do think this is just something that is going to be more and more, you know, significant as we go into the future. Managing climate change is just going to be you know, such a fundamental challenge.
Oh, I think we hit a bandwidth issue from Alice there.
Yeah.
But at this point, I think, Alex, it's probably time to hand it back over to you.
Yeah, indeed. You know, it's amazing how the time flies, because there's just so many stimulating subjects, you know, to touch on. But that's just about all the time that we have. So if we weren't able to get to your question straight away, please hit us up on social media. We'll do our best to hit you back with an answer in the coming days. I wanted to thank all of our guests for joining us for this very special webcast, and to thank everyone who's watching for taking the time to join us. Now, just a reminder that we will be showing the launch of IRIS here on GHGSat, so do watch if you can. We'll have details on when that's precisely happening on our social channels just as soon as that's available. I'm Alexander Milas with the GHGcast. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you very soon indeed.